Welcome back to day 3 of Datacloud Global Congress 2021. This session is on state of the market, African investment and growth opportunities. Do remember to put your comments and questions in the discussion box and we will get those to the panel. So with that, it's my pleasure to hand over to the moderator for this session, Dobek Peter, who is analyst at Africa Analysis. Dobek, over to you.
Thank you very much, Liz, and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining this morning's session, morning in Europe, I suppose, and also in Africa. The topic of our discussion, the content of our discussion, and we're specifically going to look at the state of the market in Africa as far as investment and growth opportunities are concerned in the data center environment, and also expanding into the cloud and the cloud edges we've seen being developed in Africa. And we've on the panel we have two panelists representing both the data center environment, the build consultancy, and I'd like to ask both of them, Amin and Andrew, to introduce themselves briefly, tell us who they are, what their companies do, what do they do maybe specifically, and how they're involved in the data center and digital infrastructure build in Africa. And then once we're done with those introductions, we'll move on to the pertinent questions and the discussion topics. So maybe starting off with Amin.
Good morning, everyone. Well, thank you, Dobek, for the intro, and thank you, BroadGroup, for organizing this. Amin, I'm the CEO of N+ONE. I founded the business back in 2008 when Africa wasn't so much a hot topic when it came to data centers. So we've been in business for quite some time, watching what's going on the continent. We now operate a few facilities in Morocco, 3 facilities over 2 campuses. And we've recently decided to open outside of Morocco, where we announced data centers in Senegal in the very near future. I think that's all I could say at the moment, and I'm sure we'll introduce a lot more about what we do in the session.
Andrew, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everybody, and yes, thanks as well to Dobek and BroadGroup for having us on this morning. My name's Fettes Brown. I'm head of data centers for RLB UK. I also head up the cost consultancy in London. RLB is a global independent construction, property and management consultancy firm, which has delivered over 200 data centers in the last five years. We've delivered and are delivering projects across the African continent, in Nigeria, Ghana, Egypt, Botswana, South Africa, Mauritius, and are currently looking at opportunities in Morocco as well. These projects are being delivered through RLB Pentad, RLB Africa, a team which has offices over 13 African countries, followed and supported by a European Centre of Excellence in London and Amsterdam. Services we provide include project management, integration project management, design management, specification, consultancy, quantity surveying or cost management, schedule management, and health and safety as well. We believe we've sort of created the right balance between international best practice and local experience with regional access across the African continent. I believe that we've also got a short animation as well that can be found in the virtual booth and is also available in the live chat below. Thanks, Rebecca.
Sure, thank you very much. We've got approximately 14 minutes on the discussion. And for the audience out there, if you have any questions as we go along, please submit them. We'll pick them up as we go through the discussion as much as we can, and try to answer all the queries that you may have. Or also, if you have comments and want to contribute, please do so. We can certainly air your comments on this platform. So to set the scene, we've got I think a very good representation on the panel of companies and people who have dealt with Africa, both North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, and data centers extensively. So they know the environment, they know what what the risks and the rewards are. I'll stay with Andrew, maybe to sort of have a helicopter view of what's happening in the data center development space in Africa. So, Andrew, maybe you could tell us in a few words, and then moving on to Amin, what has been happening in the data center space in Africa. What have we witnessed over the past maybe 2, 3, 4 years? From what I've seen, there's been quite a bit of development. And where is that development taking place? And what are some of the key projects that have taken place?
Very broad question, because obviously Africa is a huge continent with varying degrees and development statuses across the African continent. What we've seen since IBM sort of entered the market in 2016, we've seen a very much increase in take-up in cloud providers, with Microsoft Azure and AWS entering the market sort of 2019, 2020. So we're seeing quite a big push from the cloud providers as well. In terms of regions where that's currently located, we're seeing obviously South Africa being the most prolific market for a number of reasons, as well as we're seeing sort of West Africa and Nigeria and Ghana, and then East as well in Egypt, obviously Amin in Morocco, as well as Kenya really. So it's very much on the peripheral edges of the African continent. That's also following sort of new pipelines as well. So Africa 2 or 2 Africa, the new cable network coming in from the UK across the African continent and back up through into Italy, Spain and Portugal. So we are seeing a huge sort of increase in uptake in activity across the African continent at present.
Thanks, Amin. From your perspective, and maybe you could tell us a little bit more about North Africa. In the deep south, so to speak, we often tend to look up to sub-Saharan Africa and sometimes lose sight of what's happening further up north.
Yeah, well, North Africa tends to be the forgotten piece of Africa when we talk about the region. A lot is happening in our side, but we're not seeing as fast of a growth as other markets, precisely because we're also close to Europe. So we don't have the same latency issues. So one of the key drivers we're seeing in our region are going to be more related to data sovereignty, the need to locate data closer or within the jurisdictions. But from a technical standpoint, being close to Europe and not having so many latency issues makes things, or at least creates a situation where we're probably not a high priority for hyperscale implementations versus locations further south where performance may be an issue. So that's one of the drivers. But we're also seeing a lot of the demand driven also by the hyperscale cables that are being installed now and that will be landing in various points in West Africa. So we announced recently Senegal. We partnered up with different government entities locally there to help them make sense of all of this and set up facilities in Senegal. What we're seeing is that we couldn't, at least in Morocco or North Africa, we couldn't pre-sell space a few years back. So customers wanted to see the space ready, visit it before they would sign up. Versus now, Senegal, for example, where we are getting anchor tenants before the facilities are ready. And that's the big difference I'm seeing. In the past, people were concerned about announcements. People thought it was a real challenge to operate and open facilities in Africa. And I think people are getting more comfortable with the idea that, yeah, we can do it as well. Whether North Africa or West Africa, we can operate facilities to international standards with high uptime, high availability. We've learned how to solve some of the power issues in some of the locations. So all of this sets up for a bright future, I think, and tremendous growth coming up.
Thanks. Is any of that sort of preparedness to buy space in pre-sale phase before it's actually completed due to maybe the COVID-related lockdowns and the resultant greater uptake of cloud services, and now effectively everyone's rushing to try and get that space and make sure they can deliver the services from the cloud?
On our side, maybe there's an impact, but a lot of what we're seeing is simply momentum from before COVID. I didn't see an uptick because of COVID. All these projects were announced before and were underway before. Maybe there's more pressure to move faster now with COVID. Maybe we'll see some uptake due to it, but the trend was in place already long before COVID. I'm not sure if you agree, Andrew, but I think.
Yeah, definitely. I do agree that there was definitely an upward trend. I think maybe COVID has probably accelerated that pressure point. So we're seeing a lot more of enterprise coming into the cloud market, and again the hyperscales from sovereignty issues as well as latency are putting pressure then on colo developers as well. So we are definitely seeing that there is an upward trend within that. There's other sort of local issues where we've got, I think the latest reports in January, 77% of the population is 35 and under. So there's a huge amount of interest in the Internet of Things, all of which is putting a lot of pressure on data storage issues in Africa. Really.
Thanks very much for that. Yeah, I just had to mention COVID. For better or worse, it has changed our lives to less or greater extent, and will continue to do so. I mean, both of you mentioned other parts of digital infrastructure, namely subsea cables, as one of the reasons why data centers are being located where they are, or they are not, as in the case of North Africa, because of proximity of Marseille, for instance, or Southern Europe. But when we look at the broader digital infrastructure on the African continent, are data centers effectively being built as an integral part of it, or are they still being built in isolation and waiting for that connection to take place in order to make them more useful? And Andrew, your perspective? I mean, do you see still bottlenecks in the access in the broadband domain, for instance?
Yes, I would say that there is, and this is obviously a gross over simplification of the issue, because it is very, very complex situation across Africa, really. But we've definitely seen the current locations being proximity to those cables. However, the mobile phone network development is increasing significantly across Africa, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. We've seen a huge uptake on mobile phones. So we are seeing that there is a general scattergun approach. However, when you look at Africa in a whole, it's very sort of unpopulated from a data center perspective. I think DCD in February this year actually published an article, saying that in order to meet the demand, Africa needed to sort of develop 1,000 megawatts worth of data centers, or 700 new data centers across the state. So we are still way behind that approach, really.
I mean, we speak a lot about 5G, and we've also have started to see it being deployed in some of the countries in Africa, Lesotho being the first one, although it's not necessarily the top, let's say, country that springs to mind when it comes to large digital markets. But with 5G, obviously, we're going to move into an environment where edge computing becomes a lot more pertinent, and where we see the evolution of the data center facility moving towards that edge, closer to the end user customer, in order to lower the latency, assist with big data analysis, and turning effectively computing data quick and returning that useful information back to the user. Do you see that starting to happen in Africa? Data center operators pre-positioning themselves already to start moving into expanding that edge or moving it towards the edge of the network? How do you see that environment evolving over the next few years? And are we in line in Africa with other regions globally, or are we different in that respect?
On our end, at least for N+ONE, we're still watching it closely, but we have not. We're not anticipating anything in the short term. Licenses have not been issued yet for 5G. It's going to take a bit more time in our region, at least for the time being. We're not seeing it yet. I think we're still catching up. We're still looking at getting edge locations and nodes of hyperscalers set up in the region. So I think we're probably going to be a couple of years behind because we have some catching up to do in terms of our infrastructure. We still have issues around backhaul. We have to fix our backhaul connectivity in various countries. Some lack capacity, intercity, fiber, metro area networks. I'm seeing the focus a lot more today around infrastructure, fiber infrastructure, backhaul or metro. I think that's where the focus is right now. And I think that's a prerequisite to be able to run a proper 5G network. And I'm sure the data centers will follow on the edge, of course.
Okay. And Andrew, from your perspective, are we still focusing on big national or maybe regional facilities that act as effectively big data repositories and computing centers? That's where the focus is when it comes to data center build?
I think, as with the rest of the globe, there isn't really a definition of where that edge actually exists because it's technology driven, effectively, or application driven. So we're seeing more of a slower entry into the market. Obviously, that edge has transformed from where we had cloud providers storing that data across Europe. Now that storage is slowly migrating into Africa. So we are seeing that mixed mode. Definitely within the region. So we are seeing the larger scale storage facilities, and then moving down to the smaller application based nodes and what have you. But we're still seeing that there are there's a lot more concentration around creating those ecosystems in business parks and things around the continent, where you've got enterprise and cloud providers sort of hand in hand, so that you are reducing that latency effects really, and I think we'll see that continue to grow in Africa rather than significantly large data centers around the continent.
I'll stay with you, Andrew, if you don't mind. We've got a question from the audience, and because you've got exposure to a lot of countries around Africa and building data centers and advising, this feeds into the topic of different regions in Africa and different approaches. And the question is, Africa has probably very many markets in terms of maturity, infrastructure, obviously language. So is there a common challenge in Africa or Africa-specific constraints across all the markets on the continent, or are they so diverse that in fact you need to look at it country by country rather than trying to draw a common thread?
You need to look at it country by country to begin with. You need to do your homework. There are such significant challenges and differentiators. I would say the one common theme is infrastructure, and that's infrastructure both from a constructability perspective, in terms of roads, utilities, and power is significant. You're looking at Africa. I think it contains 80% of the world's population that have no access to electricity. So it's a significant issue. Yesterday, Dubek, or even think now, you're running a generator at the moment to provide yourself with electricity. So power is a key consideration in every country really. We do see huge differentiators in regards to VAT situations. So it's an additional cost as opposed to a cash flow issue. There are free trade zones set up in areas such as Nigeria, where you're not paying your import tax. Generally across Africa, you're importing around 90% of the materials as well. So your local materials are generally steel and concrete. So 90% of that sort of materials are being imported. So getting that transportation and everything to the sites. So I would say, if I was doing a broad brush across Africa, I would say one of its biggest challenges is infrastructure as a whole, really.
Thanks for that. And I mean, do you see a similarity between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa in terms of challenges, or is North Africa very different to that?
Well, the challenge is actually,
yeah,
the challenges vary from country to country. And as Andrew said, often there are issues around infrastructure, transportation. Some things that you take for granted in some locations, you cannot take for granted elsewhere. Just a simple example. You set up a facility outside the city, let's say 20, 30 kilometers. How would people get there? How do you make sure that you have proper logistics? So you will handle certain things that you don't typically handle elsewhere. You have to be mindful of a number of things. I'll take an example. We were doing a small project in Burkina Faso. And it was quite complicated to get freight by air to that location, simply because it was going to cost a lot more, and it created a whole complicated situation. So you have some countries that have some specificities. Some countries are landlocked, so they depend on other countries. When you ship something, you have to go through another country. So yeah, there isn't one cookie cutter approach to the whole to Africa. Every country is going to have its specifics.
I've got it's sort of a part of a question from one of the persons in the audience, and I mean you've got experience in terms of your own build in North Africa and also now in Senegal, and you straddle sort of the space between Sub-Saharan Africa and Europe. So the question is, what can Europe learn from Africa as far as data center development experience is concerned? Are there any pertinent points that could be transferred as a learning?
Well, there's an analogy that I like to give is that as a data center operator, we do a terraforming when we go to a location. So locations that don't have data centers and ecosystem, we have to create it from scratch. That's what we did in Morocco. And that's at a lesser extent in Senegal, because the market matured. We're 12 years later. So we have, if you were to send someone on the moon to build a data center, we're probably an African company that builds data centers that will succeed in doing it. But all jokes aside, I think we all have a lot to learn from each other. We learned to be creative with the resources that we have. We learned how to build and do with what we can find locally. So the list is long, actually. It'll take much longer than this session if we were to share with you the 12 years that led us to being where we are. Yeah. But mainly around and people.
And you learn patience, I suppose.
Oh yes, that's something you have. You have to be patient from two perspectives, but mainly from a business perspective. When you enter a market as a data center operator, you have to be patient enough for things to pick up. We've seen an acceleration, but when we started in 2008, unlike our colleagues in South Africa, Terraco, we started that about the same time. You see the pace being very different. There's nothing you can do about it. You have to wait for the market to mature. You're pushing, you're doing some enablement, you're hand-holding your client to move him into the data center. And the discussions here are not about megawatts or kilowatts. They're IT questions. So when you talk to a CIO, it doesn't ring the bell for him when you say rack, when you say kilowatt. He has other problems to solve. Right? So you need to walk him towards that part of the problem, and for him to understand that, okay, a proper data center is a baseline for him to build proper infrastructure. So it's more complex also from a commercial side to sell into the enterprise in our region.
Okay, thanks for that. There's another question from the audience, which actually leads into the next topic I wanted to discuss, and that's about new attractive projects that you're seeing in Africa that are either starting to take place or taking place, or on the books and being planned and will be taken up in the near future. And also, both of you mentioned, I think Andrew specifically, regional differentiation and differences between where data centers are being built and not built. And the question is effectively asking, where will the next hyperscale cloud region land in Africa and when? And I know there's been talk about, we saw it developing in South Africa, and now it's being talked about those edges being landing and being expanded in West Africa and East Africa possibly. So maybe Andrew, if you could start there off, whether you see interesting projects developing, what makes them interesting, appealing, attractive from an investment perspective, and whether you see the next hyperscale region developing.
Well, so in terms of exciting regions, I think we're seeing a lot of development happening in Nigeria, so in Lagos. So African Data Centers is developing a number of facilities there. We see that market sort of increasing its capacity, mainly due to local demand. The trade-free zone in Nigeria isn't a new concept, but it's definitely being utilized by a number of our clients. Yes, land is more expensive, but we're seeing that they are exempt from VAT in those zones, plus also import tax. Plus you also have to pay in US dollars if you exit outside of that zone. We're seeing 25% increase on the central bank rates. You're having to pay in local currencies. Obviously, there's a VAT and import tax as well. So we are seeing again those zones. Ghana is another sort of hot area in terms of growth. I think that is sort of being driven by accessibility and ease of construction as well. Also Kenya, very attractive. It's also got a very mature sort of contracting basis and understanding of contracts. Also really sort of sophisticated and skilled for Africa, sort of construction network really. So we are seeing those elements. Obviously, Egypt had some of the high foreign direct investment prior to COVID. They're also looking at smart cities and really sort of driving that uptake as well, really. So I still think that there will be a very much an east and west. Obviously, South Africa will always be sort of leading the overall sort of charge in scale and productivity rates, but outside of that, I definitely still see on the west and east coast. Right?
I mean, do you see Senegal developing as a maybe smaller hub for hyperscalers, or is that still a long way in the offing?
Well, we believe so. Like I mentioned before, we're preparing the necessary infrastructure to attract them, and it's not just infrastructure as in technical, but also legal frameworks, laws, regulations, data sovereignty. There are a number of issues that we have to solve for before we can become attractive to hyperscalers. And I see this trend where everybody's highly focused on the hyperscalers, but what does it really mean on the ground? Are we going to have a mega data center in every country? I don't think so. I think we're going to have regional presence. We talk a lot about the edge also. So I think hyperscalers might also adapt their infrastructure so they can become deployable in the edge. I think that's the sensible thing to do in the long term for things to be sustainable. Okay. So I think we're adopting more of a wait and see approach. We try to anticipate, but we're quite cautious. We don't want to fall in the trap of a bubble and megawatts and megawatts of capacity that leads nowhere. I went through the early days of the dot-com boom, and I do remember a number of data centers that did not go beyond the dot-com crash of the early 2000s. So one has to also be cautious so that make sure we're not in a bubble. And I'm seeing a lot of announcements with lots of capacity. And I'm usually surprised when I see announcements about more capacity than Madrid in one city in Africa. It's something that doesn't add up. Okay. So we're in the same position as all of you, trying to make sense of it, and we're talking to the hyperscalers to get a better understanding of what they really need and expect from us in these locations.
Andrew, are you seeing a greater interest from foreign investors, and also whether they are just financial companies, banks, or large data center operators that operate globally? Do you see increasing interest from them in Africa, or not yet? We have the odd case, so to speak, that has invested.
Yeah, so I definitely see that Africa is very much part of EMEA's strategy, but it's still dipping your toe into the market, really. We are seeing a number of mergers and acquisitions where people are trying to buy into the market because it is so difficult to construct in the region. General foreign direct investment has been decreasing across Africa for a number of years. So we are seeing a lot more private investment coming through. So I know, you're talking about the pressures from the hyperscales. I think the hyperscales aren't going to be building their own multiple mega data centers, but I think they'll be pushing the colo developers as well, so that they will start to then produce on their behalf as well. We're seeing a lot of, as has been on the case on the African continent for some time now, a lot of Chinese in investment, particularly through Huawei and China Mobile, where they are investing in infrastructure projects as well as the mobile network. I still see that continuing to grow. There will be a place for Europe and European consultants in that roadmap moving forward, really. But I don't see it at present just exploding. I think people are going to be cautiously growing in Africa, whilst they're focusing on expanding developments across Europe, which is far easier to develop. But there is such a huge opportunity in Africa that we will start to see more and more hyperscalers and local developers across Africa.
I just you're back with us. As well, both of you are builders in a sense, I suppose.
Yeah, we do need the. Well, I'm not sure. It might be just my Wi-Fi at home, so we won't blame it on the telco as we usually do.
Just yet. But as a builder, do you see a move towards more sustainable infrastructure development, digital infrastructure development in Africa, and data center in particular, in terms of new technologies being used to generate power, to cool down the facilities? And is that applicable across all the regions? Or again, even though the sun shines in Africa, maybe it doesn't shine as much everywhere, and you still need to be mindful of where you build and what technologies you deploy?
Well, absolutely. We are always very mindful of our footprint in terms of not just from a sustainability standpoint, but being energy efficient is actually good for us from a commercial perspective, right? So we have this imperative to actually save, and if we do a lot better with our energy use, we're going to do better financially as well. So it's natural for us to go and seek better PUE and be more aggressive in terms of our energy use and footprint. But we are seeing pressure or demand from clients to provide them with green energy, and we have to communicate on our energy footprint. There's a lot of pressure to do that. I think it also comes from the global pressure, right? And it's something that we're actively working on here in Morocco, and also for our data centers in the region. And we're lucky to be in a place where there's a lot of sun, so we do have access to lots of sustainable energy. And anywhere we go, we're going to try to replicate that model.
Great. We've got about 3 minutes left or so. So maybe in concluding remarks, I'll start with Andrew, just to maybe highlight any possible opportunities that you see in terms of digital infrastructure in Africa. And you know, Amin mentioned that there have been a lot of announcements in terms of data center builds. Are new investors almost too late to the market? The supply will exceed demand in the next few years, and if you haven't started building already, you might as well just throw in the towel.
Not at all. There is such a huge potential in Africa. At the end of the day, we've got as I say, a young population. We've got a growing population. So Nigeria is currently just over 200 million. By 2050, that'll be over 400 million. So there's a growing demand, a natural growing demand just in population size, but also GDP increases and digitalization sort of spreading across Africa. So I think there is still a huge market there, and I think people are being cautious investing in Africa. As Amin said, you know, they've been operating since 2008. And it's starting to build up momentum now, and it's only going to go, I think, one way, and it is definitely the new frontier in data centers. I think we are seeing maturity out in India, and I think we'll see a significant amount of growth in Africa over the next 4 to 10 years.
Yeah, thanks. Sure. Some scary population growth numbers we're quoting there. But it will drive demand in the future, I'm sure. I mean, from your side, do you see, is your view from up north similar? And also, do you see future more government involvement, or is it going to continue to be really private sector driven with the odd maybe government data center to deliver e-government services?
Yeah, well, I will join Andrew. We're seeing the upwards trend, most definitely. It's all about time. Time will determine how steep the curve is. So we're definitely in an upwards trend. There's plenty of capital knocking on the door to invest in this space, in digital infrastructure in Africa. So we think this will continue over the next few years, and the key drivers are also going to be the large infrastructure projects around fiber backhaul and submarine capacity. With respect to the government data centers, yes, absolutely. We're seeing, it's already the case. We're seeing a number of countries opening up government data centers. And that comes mainly from the lack of investment from the private sector. So you have governments that took it upon themselves to actually go and build their own data centers because there was no one from the private sector doing it. I can name a few African countries that have done so. I'm not sure it's the right thing to do or not. Every country is sovereign and they have to have their own strategy. But I'm a believer in letting the private sector work. Governments have no business operating data centers. It's up to us, the private sector, to actually come in and invest and do so. So I'm on the fence when it comes to this trend. We'll see how it goes.
Super. Thank you very much. And any other concluding remarks in the last sort of tens of seconds we've got left? All good?
All good.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for having us.
Wishing you the best of luck in your future endeavors and expansion across the African continent. And thank you very much to the audience. I think we've handled most of the questions. The recording, I think, will be available after the conference has concluded. And if you have any further questions, I'm sure you can direct them to the conference organizers and to the panelists, and they'll be more than happy to provide you with answers as to the best of the abilities.
Thank you. Thank you for having
Enjoy
us.
the rest of the day.
Yeah, likewise.
Okay.
Thank you, Dovak, for your expert moderation, and to Amin and Andrew as well for your contributions. There's been a lot of comments from the audience thanking you for all of your insights. So thank you very much for sharing. We're back shortly for a session on Edge as the emerging asset for digital infrastructure. So we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks for now.